Hello again. My name is Kirk. I did my first video 2 days ago, and I said that I wanted to continue on this regarding the victims of Kentucky boys camps. Um, Basically, in my first video, I let everybody know what uh, what our mission was, what we were looking to do, and I explained that I wanted to tell you all about actually my story of how things went the entire time I was in, and I realized to tell the whole story would take hours, and so I'm going to have to break it down in segments. So, I guess the way I'll start off is telling you that I did my time in Woodsmen Boys Camp, which is in Morgan County, Kentucky, and that was done during the time of October 1979 till late July 1980. And I did mention last time that the reason I was sent there was stealing a car. So I'm going to back up from that and I'll tell you how it kind of began. Um, I'm going to have to talk a moment about religion just to get you up to speed on this. I know everybody's beliefs are different, but basically, religion is what got me into trouble to begin with, and this is how it went. I was raised from the point of birth, the first time I ever remembered in life. My mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and so that was the rulings that I was brought up with, and it's because of the religion itself and its teachings that kind of led me astray. And it's not the religion itself that did it, it was the teachings. And it's basically this. Um, my mother let me know, as well as all the people of the congregation, that as far as they were aware of, that a big event was to take place around about 1975. And that was to be the War of Armageddon. Now, anybody that's not into religion, you probably might not understand that at all, but it's basically stating that God was going to take over and all the wicked people in the world were going to be either on a good side or the bad side. And with that in mind, my mother let me know that around 1975, this Armageddon was to take place. And therefore, if I was not practicing and doing the right thing in God's eyes, then I would have been considered one of the bad people. And in that event, I had no real life to look forward to. My life could be extinguished at that time. So, knowing that, I was born in 1962 in September. So that means when 1975 rolled around, I was only going to be 12, possibly 13 by the time this happened. If you know you're not going about the proper procedures, if you are not practicing, and if you're just talking a religion, that's one thing. But if you know that you're supposed to be adhering to certain rules and regulations and principles, and if you're not doing them, it's not the men that are going to judge you in a church, it's God Himself. So the fact that I believed in it because my mother believed in it so strongly kind of left me hanging. And I got to thinking to myself, I really don't have a lot to look forward to if I'm not going to be able to follow these rules and regulations. So, in my world, that meant that my life could be extinguished at the age of 12 or 13. And if you really want to think down the road from that, what it comes down to is this. When you're 12 or 13, you've never even attained high school. You're not going to get a high school diploma. You're never going to go to college. You're never going to have a chance to buy your own home. You're never going to attain the age of, say, get married. You're never going to have children. You're almost given a death sentence. I mean, I kind of likened it to if you went to a doctor and found out that you had stage 4 cancer, and the doctor, let's say he gave you 6 weeks to live, would any of you really go by the same living procedure that you've been going through? My guess would be no. Um, kind of like people when they mention, well, if I won the lottery, I'd keep my job. And I'm thinking, sure you would. If you win a big enough lottery, I don't care what your job is, unless you love it, you're not going back to that job. So in my world, I thought, all right, if I'm doomed, I want to live every day as if it was the last day I was going to be on this planet. And when you're that young, and you don't have the right to just leave home and nobody's going to harass you, and where you going to go, and you don't have a job and you don't have any money to pay for anything, what do? Well, my mother made it real clear to me that if I wasn't going to follow the proper procedures and I wasn't going to go along with what she had to say, that I really didn't have a right to even live under her roof. Now, if you go by legalities, that's a ridiculous thing, because my mother was responsible for my well-being and everything about me until I attained the age of adulthood. But at that point, I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just go do whatever I have to do. If that means living on the street, so be it. And there was a very rocky time between my mom and I for several years there. And I went about doing whatever I could. And by the age of 14, let's say, I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to do everything that I want to do. And it came about that there was a girl that my cousin was going out with, and I knew her well. And she gave me a phone call and let me know that she said she was pregnant. And she asked that I make sure to get my cousin down to Kentucky, where they then lived. They had been living in Michigan for quite some time. They finally returned to the Pikeville area, and that's where my cousin was needed, according to her. So I went ahead and let my cousin know this, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to get to Kentucky. And we asked our friends, and when you're at that age, you know, you have a couple of older friends that might be using the family car, or there might even be a couple of them that actually had their own, I'll call it a beater car, because I don't know of anybody at that kind of age where they really had good cars at that point. So after exhausting asking all of our friends, can you drive us there? And got a lot of no's and runarounds, and well, you need to provide this and that and gas money and all this stuff. And we really didn't have anything. We finally decided the only way we were going to make this happen was to steal a car. And at first, to tell you the kind of person I was back in that time, I might have been warned that the end was coming, but I still wasn't really out to hurt anybody. I mean, my cousin and I, it got ridiculous for a while. We decided we're going to go hang out in parking lots at shopping centers where people would be going in for groceries or whatever. And we had croquet sticks, not the mallets, just the stick that you put behind the loops. And we were going to take and hit somebody with these things when we saw them come out of a store. And that's how we were going to get their car. And we got to thinking about it. We didn't want to hurt anybody. In fact, all we ended up doing is helping a lot of older people with their groceries. I mean, it wasn't within us to really go and hurt somebody just to acquire a car. So at that point, we decided we had to change strategy or we were going to end up going nowhere. So we went ahead, and my cousin knew of this house where he used to deliver the newspaper, and he was always gone. He was a factory worker. According to my cousin, he only came home like once a week. He knew this because whenever he went to collect for his newspapers, he always had a hard time ever finding this guy home. Well, we found that his rear window of the house was really not locked, and all we had to do is slide the window open, and we were able to stay in this man's house and sit on a couch and look out the window that had all Venetian blinds on it to a parking lot right next door to a bar. And in this way, we could sit inside a house and watch drunk people come and go out to their cars, and we could continuously go out and check and see if one of these cars had the keys in it. Well, we ended up staying in this man's house for a couple of days, and we just kept a constant eye on that parking lot. And on the second day, we finally found a guy that went out to his car, with a woman, and they were only out there a little while, and before you know it, they went back in the bar, and I ran out there, and sure enough, he left the keys in it. And so we went ahead and we closed up the man's house, and we grabbed up the car, and we took off for Kentucky. Um, I might add that my cousin and I were both kind of OCD. That's obsessive compulsive disorder. Whereas I was raised by my mother to be very neat, clean, and organized, and beyond a fault, and it's beyond a lot of people's limitations. Um, so when we got this car, it happened to be a 1978 Lincoln Mark V. You couldn't do much better than that in that day and age. This was 1979. The car only had 4,000 miles on it. And so we took off in this, and we really didn't have any money with us. And we ended up selling everything that was in the trunk, including the spare tire, in order to afford to get all the way down to the Pikeville area. Um, Now, not to go into too much of the details on that, but we ended up pulling up at a house that was in an area called Suki's Creek. It was just south of Pikeville, and it was very, very remote. It was a log cabin, and when we pulled up, there was a man that came running out with a shotgun yelling, "You're not going to pimp my daughters." Well, at that point in time, I didn't really understand the statement, and it was only later that I really realized what he meant by that. And the fact is, nobody in that area of Kentucky would have a, what would you call, luxury or prestigious car of that magnitude. And for a couple of young guys like we were coming down there in something like that, um, it probably really stuck out. And it wasn't long before we got arrested with that car in the area. In fact, my cousin and I just got done washing and waxing and vacuuming it out because, well, we're neat freaks. So the fact that we were so neat with this guy's car got us a free ride home because the man never pressed charges because he was so happy to get his car back after it had not been completely stripped or tore down or whatever. And we ended up back in Michigan within 4 days. And I would say a week later, I found another car, which was a Mazda, nowhere near the condition, but we took that down there. And we got all the way down there, and we literally got pulled over by the same state trooper as we did the first time. And he was a little disappointed in our car choice after seeing our first one, but nonetheless, we got sent into the detention center in Pikeville. And that was about the time when we figured out my cousin was not up for incarceration. He did not like to be closed in, and his tendencies there told the people, look, we're going to send him to Prestonsburg, where they had a newer institution that was more readied for this kind of person. And so we were separated at that point. The man in Michigan never pressed charges on his car as well because it was never damaged, and therefore we were flown back to Michigan. We step ahead a little bit, and I was literally picked up by a man in Michigan while I was hitchhiking that tried to force me to go to a motel. And I wasn't about that, and it was a clear setup that the inside of the car on my side, when he started talking funny things, you start realizing things like, hey, there's no window crank. There's no door handle on my side. Well, this is a clear setup. And the man took me to a motel. He asked me at first, he said, would you like to go to a motel? And I said, no. And he said, well, that's too bad, you're going anyway. So here we are pulling up to a motel room. And any time that I ever hitchhiked at that time in my life, I always carried a post inside. It was a bicycle seat post. And I used to carry that in my pocket under a windbreaker. I'd tuck it under my arm just in case somebody assaulted me. Well, it's a good thing I had that this night because this man came around the car. He basically opened the door for me, grabbed me by the wrist, and pulled me out of the car. And then he had a key to the motel room, and he opened that door, and he pushed me inside. And once he turned inside the door, and locked the door and turned towards me. That's when I hit this guy with the club. And I went about hitting this man because, as far as I was concerned, he was a person that was out to hurt me. He took me to a motel against my will, and his car was set up in a way that you can tell he'd done this before. Um, so at that point, I asked for his money and keys, and he was definitely hurt by that point, and he handed it over. And I jumped in the car, and I went to my cousins and picked him up and let them know what had happened, and we took off for Kentucky again. So here we are driving back down to Kentucky, only this time now we have money. And I just avoided getting assaulted myself. In fact, this was my first assault other than an actual fist fight in school. And definitely outside of my comfort zone. But we head down there this time, and we get down to Kentucky, and my cousin asked to drive. And we were on a very curvy coal miners road in the very far eastern Kentucky point, and he was cutting the corners off of each one of the turns, and came around a blind turn where there was a big coal truck, a rig, right there. And he had to remaneuver the car quickly. He jerked the wheel. We hit the face of the cliff there, the mountainside, and it threw the car out of control. And here we are flying off a cliff. I mean, we're taking off the tops of trees, and I'm braced against the dash, and we are like flying into who knows where. And that was the first time in my life that I actually thought, you know, I'm going to die right now. This is it. Up until then, I really didn't consider that I was going to die other than by religious belief. And we came smashing into the edge of the mountain, and the car turned on its side. I went through the windshield. I pulled my arms out of the socket. My cousin was got a lot of injuries in his chest. I think that he literally had broken ribs, but we couldn't go to a doctor. And it's a good thing that this coal truck driver stopped and made his way down and helped us out of there. Otherwise, we would have never gotten out. Well, now we're carless and we're hurt, which led us a few days later into the city of Pikeville. And for the first time, now we need transportation, and we're not in our home state of Michigan. And we found an old, I believe it was a 1972 or 73 Chevy Nova, and the keys were in it, and we took off in it, and we went and hid out in a junkyard that was off 23 south of Pikeville. And there was an old motor coach there that we kind of hung out in for a day, trying to figure out what our next move would be. And there was a store right down the street, and it was called Finer Foods. I know it's gone now because I just went last year looking for it, and it is long gone. But there was some pop bottles outside in a grocery basket. And we figured, okay, it's time for us to head towards Michigan, regroup, and do whatever we got to do. And all we needed was gas money to do the job. And we saw these pop bottles as an opportunity. And it wasn't even daylight out, it was just becoming light. And we're loading up the trunk when a man pulls up in a pickup truck and gets out with an axe handle. And at that point, I was just shutting the trunk and jumped back in the car, started it, and he came up and stated, "You need to give those pop bottles back." And I said, "What pop bottles?" And he said, "The ones in your trunk." And I said, "I don't have any," and I put it in reverse, and I got out of there. And we made it about a mile down the road, and I hid the car behind trees off the road. And my cousin and I tried to run back through a field to get back to this junkyard so we could hide out till what we considered the heat blew over. But we stuck our neck out and put ourselves out in Route 23, I-23 there, or US 23, I should say. And just so happens the same cop that's arrested us before sees us again. And it sounds like a cartoon because you'd think that you would run across more. But this man got to know us pretty well. And there was no car that we were in at the time, but there's a man down the street here that said two guys just was in a car, and he was able to identify us as the guys that were there. And so he started looking for the car, found it, and to make a long story short, he ends up taking us back into the detention center in Pikeville. So this time we've stolen a car from Kentucky, and they're definitely going to press charges on this. And now our lives as we knew it are about to change pretty heavy. Of course, they separated my cousin and I again. I stayed in Pikeville. He was taken to Prestonsburg immediately. And while I was in the Pikeville Detention Center, or yes, that's when I got to talking to some of the, we'll call them inmates there. And there was a few of them that had already been through the camp system in Kentucky. And I had no knowledge of how the camps were run or the prisons were run or anything. All I knew is at that point I was 17 years old. So I was definitely going to be treated as a juvenile. And so they're starting to name off all these different camps and how the camps are supposedly run. And of course, it's all hearsay. I don't know whether to believe them, disbelieve them. You just kind of absorb all the knowledge you can and try to make use of whatever they're telling you. And they did let me know one thing that really stood out. And they said, you know what? There's a lot of camps. He says, as long as you don't go to Woodsmen, you'll be fine. And what's the odds? You know, there's so many that you could end up at. And I thought, okay, yeah, you're right. What's the odds? Well, they start talking escape. They want to escape. And they came up with a plan. And I'm like, okay, all I want to do is get out. And as I've told you already, I was living as if every day was my last day. So why am I worried about penance? You know, why am I worried about what's going to happen tomorrow? You're living for that moment. And if you really wanted to clean up your life and you said, you know what, I screwed up, and you want to do the right thing. Why? Because so that you don't have to look over your shoulder the rest of your life. I mean, you run out of any place, and of course, you are going to be held liable until something happens. In my brain, it didn't matter as long as I could get away now. Tomorrow didn't matter, and a year from now didn't matter. And, you know, I'm a kid. You know, this is not a big thing. I just didn't do an armed robbery. I'm not Al Capone. I'm just a small-time nobody. So the odds of me being on everybody's radar, especially back in that day, was pretty slim to none. So when they all said, yeah, let's do an escape attempt, we did. There were 7 of us that ran out of that place, and one was even a female. Excuse me. So we all ran out, and we all went and hid. And to make a long story short on that, give it the second day I was out, they caught me. And they returned me. And the people at the detention said, no, we don't want anything more to do with this guy or any of the guys or people that escaped. And so they had to lock me up in the jail. And they did that for just hours until they could transfer me over to Prestonsburg. And I thought, good, then I'll get to reunite with my cousin and we can set up a new plan over there. Not knowing the layout didn't matter. As long as we got our heads together, we could probably come up with something. Except for when they got me over to Prestonsburg, they walked me through the place straight into what I'll call solitary confinement. It was a confinement cell with nobody else in it. And they locked me in there, and I stayed in that cell until people from all camps, Woodsmen, arrived. And they unlocked the door, and I wasn't sure what was going on. They let me through there, and they took me out in the main room, and there was 2 kids, I'll consider kids because they were younger, and 1 staff standing there. And the moment they filled out the paperwork, we're walking out a door, we're coming down 2 flights of stairs, and we're going to a state-run car. It was a blue AMC car, and it had the big state label on the side and everything, and I was put in the right rear seat. And from the moment we got in that car, that's when my life started to change. I found out that the one driving was the official staff member. And what they had is two group members that were from Woodsmen that were in a group called Phase 2. And I'll be able to fill you in more on Phase 2 later. Let's just say when you get to these camps, or the camp I was in, at the time there was 4 groups, later to be made into 5, and then plus you had a group called Phase 2. Phase 2 was a group that you got sent to after you got all your steps in once you were at that camp. It was used for holding people until either their 18th birthday, their 21st birthday. If you were a federal prisoner, you could end up staying in this system for a very long time. And that's the one thing that I found out about Woodsmen. It wasn't just a state-run facility, it was considered federal. So here's these two guys, one sitting in the passenger seat in the front and one sitting just to my left in the rear. And they started asking me questions. And to tell you the truth, if I tried to tell you exactly what I was saying at that point, I couldn't really tell you what the actual conversation was. I remember so much about the camp activities like it was yesterday, but to tell you exactly what was being said in this car, I cannot repeat that because I do not remember the conversation. I just remember them asking me questions about what did I get in trouble for? Where am I from? I like to escape, don't I? You think that you're going to escape this place. You think you're going to go AWOL and everything. And the whole time I'm being yelled at, and this is a lot of yelling in this car. The one guy sitting next to me kept grabbing me by my left arm and jerking me. And he would be putting his elbow up in his forearm, and as he jerked into me, that arm would be hitting me in the head, and it would bounce my head off the right passenger window of that car over and over. Now, I do not know the exact mileage between Prestonsburg, Kentucky and West Liberty, Kentucky, but I'm going to say we had no less than an hour drive, hour and a half drive to the camp. And the entire way, I'm being screamed at, yelled at, jerked on, forearmed into the head repeatedly. Well, the staff, all I remember is seeing his eyes in the mirror, looking at me, and he even laughed at me a few times, stating, "You'll never escape from where we're taking you. I give you everything you can try to make it happen. It ain't gonna happen." So, needless to say, by the time we pulled up in front of Woodsmen, it was dark from when they picked me up, so it was really dark by the time we got there. And as we're pulling in front of the camp, I couldn't help notice, and I will show pictures of this later so that everybody gets a nice view of it. If you were to look at this camp from the road, you would think, this can't be that bad. How could it be? You have white fences like you'd find anywhere throughout Kentucky on horse farms, cattle farms. You could see a ball diamond. It was even lit up. There was a basketball court out in the front. There was even a small little section of bleachers right next to the ball diamond. I mean, it looked like a place where you could go and have some fun. But from the treatment I got from the detention center to the camp itself, it was obvious it's not all fun and games, that's for sure. But the one thing that the staff member kept saying to me, and I could see his eyes in that mirror the whole time, and he kept on saying, "Daniels, no matter what you try, you will never escape here." So we pull in the driveway, and we pull up to the building, and we get out, and they lead me right up to the front porch, which is where a huge fireplace is at, and we go in the door. And basically, I'm walked right into an office right off the front, and there's a big, tall man that was standing outside, and he came in behind me, and they had a folding chair sitting there, and he told me to sit, and I did. And he stood just to my right, and there was another man sitting at a big long desk, and he was definitely relaxed. This man had his feet up on the desk, he had his arms crossed, and he was kicked back. And I remember his eyes, they were like slits. They were like, he was totally relaxed in his element. And I thought, this don't look too bad. And he asked me a question. And he said, so what are you here for, Daniel? And I had a way, I guess, about me at that point that when I went to talk, I'm very nervous. This is a new environment. I don't know what the heck I'm in for. And I made a noise. I just kind of went, huh, well, and that's about all it took, because I was grabbed from the front, pulled from the chair, slammed into a wall, thrown right back into that chair within a couple seconds. And when I hit that chair, the whole chair squeaked backwards, and now I'm sitting back in the chair. And I'm looking at the man behind the desk. I'm like, are you going to do something about this? You can't do this. I didn't say a word, but I'm looking at this man like, you got to help me here, you know? And that's when I noticed that this man hadn't flinched. His feet hadn't moved, his arms were still crossed, and his eyes, I swear, if he did blink, I'd never seen it. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this man has no reaction to this? So he asked me again. He said, now, Daniel, tell me, why are you here? And me, I did the same stupid thing. I went, huh, well, and I was picked up again. And this time I was slammed harder into the wall and slammed harder into the chair. And that's when he took his feet off the desk and he leaned forward towards me and he says, I think you're going to start to understand our rules around here. And there was all kinds of things that I wanted to say, like, what rules? I don't have any rules. You haven't told me anything. Nothing's established here. You want a lot of information from somebody and you want me to understand everything that's going on, but you haven't told me anything. And yet I'm thinking, I have never in my life up to that point, nobody has ever been able to just pick me up like I was a bag of potato chips and do something like that effortlessly and slam me back into a chair. And under normal circumstances, if anybody ever treated me like that, I would probably be trying to pick up a weapon or something and I would be going after them, I'm assuming. But to just sit there and take something like that, I mean, I could not believe I was in this situation. And I figure if it's that bad and they consider taking an adult and picking up a kid and doing that, I'm living in hell. There's no telling what these people can actually do. And they finally got me to answer a few just standard questions about why I was there, what I was charged with. And that's when I found out the man that just whipped me into a wall was now going to be my group leader. And that's not a good thought, because from there, I was marched out of that office, still with no rules and regulations. I did not know what was expected of me. I did not know what I needed to deal with. All I know is a grown man just picked me up out of my chair like I was a nobody and slammed me into a wall. And the man, I found out, was the superintendent. He acted like this was everyday business. That told me that no matter what happened from that moment on, if it got better, great, but I sure wasn't going to expect anything. And that's when they hurried me down. Now, I can walk pretty fast. And at that point in time, they're walking me about as fast as you can walk without calling it a run. And they took me through the outdoor, through a breezeway, down a sidewalk, across the parking lot where I heard a bunch of yelling, which I don't remember verbatim of what they were saying. I just saw wood, heard saws cutting wood. I heard, it sounded like busting wood, big hammers hitting wedges. And these guys screaming at somebody, but I couldn't tell who it was. It's dark. They have lights out on the parking lot, and they walked me right into a tool shed. a big tool shed, like a garage, where you could park vehicles and everything. And that's where they went about sitting me down in a chair, took most of my hair off. It was almost like a military cut. And then they handed me clothes, which were Army fatigues. And I put these clothes on, and everything was hurry up, move around, hurry, hurry. Everything's hurry. So I'm trying to just do whatever they tell me to do. And then a couple other guys that I haven't never seen before, and I found out later they were going to be my group members in fourth meeting. They ran me out the door where they already had what they considered a grouping meeting going on, where they had a man, or a boy, I should say. He had his arms straight out like this, and they kept loading wood, stacks of wood, up above his head. And he is basically running across the parking lot with this big stack of wood as fast as he can move. And they're all screaming and pushing on him to move around. It was always screaming. There was never ordinary talk. It wasn't like I'm talking now. It was as loud as you could scream. And, well, I guess if you're screaming at somebody very loud like that and you're at a distance, that's one thing. But they had this thing about screaming directly into your ear. Their face would be right up to your ear, and they'd be screaming as loud as they can. And I've always questioned, how am I not completely deaf today? I don't know, because this went on 9.5 months. They tell me to go ahead and move this guy around. And I'm looking at him, and he's a tall black guy. And I came from Detroit, and all I knew was I watched the riots happen in 1967 in Detroit. My aunt was part of it. My father had to go down and move my aunt out because they literally leveled the place. And my cousins were raped down there and everything else. And it was all by black people. And so, therefore, for me to be affiliated with that, well, let's see, my racial, is it something that, I can't count on them because of that? I wasn't really sure. I'd never been in an environment where I had to worry about blacks and whites together, but you see TV. You see how things go. And now I'm not completely in a jail, but I'm told I cannot leave. There's no bars and there's no razor wire, but they told me you're not going to be able to escape here. Well, that was still up for debate. But at that point in time, they're wanting me to move this guy around, which is literally walking as fast as you could ever walk with wood. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? This is a ridiculous request. Why would you ask me to do this? Of course, I went to say that, and they grabbed hold of me and grabbed hold of my chest and grabbed hold of my arms and were jerking me like this. And they're telling me, we didn't ask you for nothing. You move him around. So I'm like, okay, I don't get this, but all right. And so I go like, move around. And they go, no, louder, like you mean it. And they jerk me some more. And I'm going, move around. And they obviously were not happy with my volume level. So they started jerking me to the point that they were already ripping my shirt off. And if you've ever seen any Army fatigues, then you know it's pretty thick, but it still gives. But the one thing that never seems to give is the cord that's in the necks of the shirts. You can strip the rest of the shirt off, but that cord never lets go. And so every time they jerk it, the cord is ripping into my neck. So before that evening is even over, I'm already bleeding at the neck. And my first set of clothes that I've only been wearing maybe 10 minutes, is already being shredded from my body. So this is my introduction to Woodsmen. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going to happen later? Because every time I told him to move around and I put my hands on his shoulder, because they're telling me that's what you need to do, he'd look over at me, and he's much taller than me, much bigger than me. I don't know how this is going to go. My thought is, when things quiet down later, he might come looking me up. Maybe he'll just cut my throat with a knife. Maybe he'll attack me somewhere where he's not in their range. Well, I come to find out later that that's not how this camp worked. You never got by yourself. You weren't allowed to have friends. These were your group members. They were there to help you. You're there to help them with their problems. No friendship, no smiling. There's no reason to smile in this camp. You will never, ever, ever find a reason other than two things. If you get a visit from your people, that's a reason to smile. Okay, there we go. There's one out. The next thing, they let me know if we happen to be watching a movie. There might be something funny in that. It's appropriate to smile or laugh then. Other than that, they let me know from that day one. There is no reason to smile in that camp. There's nothing funny going on, and they weren't kidding. So at this point, here I am trying to move this guy around. And I'm trying to hurry a guy that's already doing the best he can so I don't get the point. And I realized that they were never going to hand me a rule book. They were never going to hand me anything that showed me this is exactly how it goes. It's called pay attention, learn as you go throughout every day. And that's what I had to do. Now, I went ahead and made it through that evening. And then I was assigned this bunk where I had to sleep. And I was more than happy to hit that bunk. And it seemed like I was only in that bunk 15 minutes and the lights were back on. And it was an amazing thing. But I realized that I can't go much farther on this at the moment. I'm going to have to resume in this area. I just wanted everybody to get an idea that when I say that kids were abused and tortured in these camps, we're not talking little petty smacks or somebody put you down and called you a name or just yelled at you a couple of times. This was a place that took advantage of the situation. They did what they wanted because they could. There wasn't anybody that was going to tell them what the rules were, and if the staff said it's okay, well, that's fine with them. If the staff said go murder that guy, I guess we'd be murdering somebody because we beat people within an inch of their lives. I had myself hurt by others within an inch of my life. In fact, the pain got so intense that I did pass out. And they have ways of waking you up too, and then they just continue. I will explain all this in the next video. I don't want to take up too much time on each one of these, but I definitely want to be somewhat thorough so everybody that sees this gets a real understanding of why this is a problem. We're not talking about minor inconveniences. We aren't talking about scolding somebody that did something wrong. We're talking about staff that literally knew every torture technique. They knew every part of your body where they could just touch you in a shoulder and give you pain, bring you to your knees. They had techniques of standing you up and bending you over in locked knee position, we'll explain more later, where you couldn't stand the pain at all. In fact, it was when I was put in that position itself that I changed for life. When you are screaming at the top of your lungs, pleading for them to stop because you can't stand the pain anymore, because you can't feel your legs, and your feet literally have buckled over at the ankles, and your back feels like somebody threw gasoline on you and you were literally on fire. Your brain can only process so much pain before you can't stand it no more. And I remember passing out and being woke up with cold water. And it was at that point that changed me for life. Because I've been hurt many times in my life, and it just goes along with anybody's life. But to literally be held in a position when you are pleading and screaming because you're about to lose sanity, and they don't even hesitate and they just continue, that tells me that the place that I am in does not care about how you feel. They do not take into account that you have been completely and totally hurt. And so they don't follow any rules and regulations. This is obviously against the law. This torture is not condoned. And yet they were condoning it by the staff telling the group members to keep doing it. And this is the point where I felt that, you know what, I really need to do something about this. How can I let people that are walking around in the world today, still on the streets with families, around kids, they were able to do this to me, many others in those camps. And they did it before I came in, and they did it after I left. And this was what they considered their job, yet they took so much pleasure in it. They loved it. They liked hurting you. They made up reasons to hurt you. And that's why this is such a huge issue to me. It's not about being placed in a place because you did something wrong. This is so much more than that. It's like I went to that camp because I stole a car and I should pay my penalty. Then I get there and they're able to torture me and torture everybody else, and we're made to torture other people. That doesn't go together. It doesn't make it right. It's not a good end. So therefore, I know that torture itself is against the law. And I don't want to let these people walk around freely and all their friends and their relatives and family members thinking, hey, he just goes to work and he's a good guy. And yeah, that good guy is the one that's over here at the boys' camp and he's tearing us up. So in my next post or video, which will be either tomorrow or the day after, I will continue on from this point. And at least, hopefully, this is starting to give you an idea of why I'm going after this, why I can't leave it alone. It needs to be dealt with. These people need to be dealt with. I needed to be dealt with. I was wrong, but that doesn't make them right. They are wrong, and they are wrong in a much higher way than I ever was. And I feel like, hey, if I had to pay for my crime, they created a crime much larger. Why are they able to walk? Why are they free on the streets today? If people like me and anybody else that have ever been hurt there, if we don't do something, then that means we're, one, we condone it, or two, we're just too lazy to do something about it. I remember this after 37 years. I still remember almost every single day in that camp, and I can't let it go. So anybody that feels like I do, maybe not exactly, maybe something was a little bit different, I would definitely recommend that we get together. We compare notes, we compare stories, we compare names. I've already got a lot of information on a lot of these staff, as I mentioned in the first video. I'm compiling as we speak, and I'm not going to let this go. I don't care if I have anybody helping me, but I am going to do something about this issue, and if they allow me to, I am going to change the laws, rules, and regulations of Kentucky so that nobody else has to deal with this again. So I will get back with you again either tomorrow or the following day, and I will continue on with this, and I appreciate you watching.